we need to understand the historical context. Palestine and Jerusalem are here along this small strip of land on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. In the ancient world, there were two major empires. The empire that was in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley and the Egyptian Empire. And these two were the greatest powers, and they needed to trade with each other. And they could not trade by going across the Arabian desert. There just were not enough oases for a caravan to get across. So the only way that they could really trade by land was to go up the river valleys into the low hills and then down along the coast and back and forth. So as you can see, Palestine and Jerusalem became extremely important for the economy of the ancient world. You could not trade from one side to the other without passing through Palestine and Jerusalem. The result of this is that as long as they had a strong army and a strong king, Jerusalem and Palestine could keep the eastern empires in Egypt at bay. But when they weren't strong, these empires simply overran them. And the first to do so was the Assyrians. If you see this dark green area, this is the area where the Assyrians took total control. Now what do I mean by total control? The Assyrians were known for whenever they took over a culture, they would kill every single man who could stand upright. Every single one. This was genocide. And then they would take all the women and children into slavery. And they would even kill the peasant men. I mean, everybody. And they would move their own people onto the peasant farms and completely take over the area. This dark green area is where they did that. They completely obliterated every culture that they came in contact with. The light green areas, even down in Egypt, because they made Egypt a vassal state for them, is where they let the culture stay as it was, but made them pay tribute. But look at this huge area where they basically committed genocide. Did away with anybody who was different from them. Well, they didn't last too long, about 150 years. And they were followed by the Babylonians. The Babylonians took over a much smaller area. They weren't able to take over Egypt. And they really didn't care too much about the isolated communities in the Arabian desert. But they still took over all of Palestine, including Jerusalem. But they had a different attitude than the Assyrians. They felt that they were much more enlightened. Yes, we're going to kill your kings, we're going to kill your queens, we're going to kill your princes and princesses, but we want to keep alive all your scribes, all your musicians, all your priests, and we want to carry them off back over here to Babylon so we can learn from them. And yes, we're not going to kill all your peasant farmers. Let them stay on the land. We want them to farm the land. We'll just bring in our leadership to keep track of it. So they were, in a sense, a little bit more enlightened. So they carried off all these people to Babylon to learn from them, from the Assyrians, from the Sumerians, from the Jews. All those leaders were brought to Babylon so they could learn their customs and learn their history. This is what in Scripture is referred to as the Babylonian exile. The Babylonians were not too keen on preserving the culture that they couldn't keep the temple in Jerusalem. They did destroy the temple completely and raze Jerusalem to the ground. But they did keep alive the intelligentsia, who, about 60 years later, got to go back to Jerusalem because the Persians, Babylonians didn't last long, the Persians took them over. Persians created a huge empire that went all the way to Greece. And the Persians were even more enlightened than the Babylonians. They wanted the intelligentsia and everybody to go back to their cultures, back to their lands, just pay us tribute. Don't forget to pay the tribute, by the way. Don't forget to pay the taxes. But let your culture thrive. As a matter of fact, the Persians were so interested in letting cultures thrive where they were that they actually paid people to rebuild those cultures that the Assyrians and Babylonians had destroyed. The money that rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem came from Persia. Yeah, the Persian emperor said, rebuild your temple, here, we'll give you some money. And by the way, when you're done, keep sending the tribute. So there you go. So the Persians were the most enlightened of the ancient peoples until you get to the Greeks.